It's now my pleasure to introduce our second award-winning speaker, Peter Wadhams, who is the UK's most experienced CI scientist, and that's what he got his prizes for. And I don't know if you've seen his book, A Farewell to Ice. Somebody gave it, I've got a hardback. Somebody gave it to me for Christmas, and it's a really good read. Not just is it very powerful, but it's actually got loads of useful stuff in it for quoting, which is what I prize greatly in a book. So we're going to hear from Peter now. He's going to talk about Arctic climate feedbacks and food production. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much, Adrian, because this has been a wonderful talk that showed you what the Arctic and the Antarctic actually look like. I'd like to sort of basically carry on the same theme, which is...
Can you use the microphone?
Which is, which is climate change, and especially insofar as it's affected by, it's related to change in the Arctic. And then two aspects of what that immediately means for us in the way of food production and food disruption. And then, of course, the overwhelming theme, which is, of course, the fact that the rate of climate change and its continuation is a function of our increasing numbers, and that's a fundamental problem. So, first of all, I won't advertise my book anymore, except it's penguin, so it's very, very cheap. When we look at the Arctic, as Adrian has said, it's warming up much faster than any other part of the world. And if we look, this is the amount of warming that's happened since the 1950s to 1980s. And as a function of latitude, we find that most of the world has warmed by about 0.7 of a degree on average. That's just in the last half century. But the Arctic, the further north you go, the more the degree of warming, until you were getting up to 2 to 3 degrees of warming at the very highest latitudes. So there's an amplification factor which we can't fully explain at the moment, but it's warm, and this has been going on for the last 150 years since the Arctic started, since the world started warming under greenhouse gas release from steam engines to start with. We found that the Arctic has warmed faster than anywhere else, and this continues to be the case. So since the Arctic is that warming faster, it's thought to be a kind of bellwether for the rest of the world. And one of the ways in which this shows itself is, of course, is the fact that the sea ice is melting very rapidly. And now this started to happen in 1950, as far as we can measure, and by the year 2005, we have the first year, that's the little bit in there, the first year in which the summer Arctic, the ice shrank so far back from the coastline that you could no longer think of the Arctic Ocean as a continuation of Siberia and Eurasia across the North Pole. We always used to think of the North Pole as being solid ice, and you could go from Russia to America and vice versa. But suddenly the shrinkage year by year reached the point by 2005 when we had a complete slot of open water right around the edge. Then in 2007, then things proceeded in terms of downward jumps. So in 2007, a huge slice came out of the Arctic, and we had an open ocean for the first time in the northern seas. And then the next step down was in 2012, when it went back even further. So we have an ocean now where you can sail happily in the summer through the Northwest Passage, across the north of Russia, and no longer do we think in terms of the ice filling the Arctic Ocean. Now, all the time that this was going on, we could see how this ice was shrinking using satellites, But also, we need to measure how thick the ice was. Whereas for quite a long time, since the 1970s, I've been going up to the Arctic every couple of years in Royal Navy submarines, measuring ice thickness from underneath. And we found, therefore, that the thickness has gone down by about 50%. The average thickness of the Arctic ice is 50% less than it was in the 1970s. And since the area has gone down as well, you multiply the two together, the volume has really gone down. And if we look now at ice volume in the summer, it's now less than a quarter of what it was in 1979. So 3/4 of the ice has gone. This has enormous impacts. First of all, you don't see this kind of stuff anymore. This is multi-year ice, really thick, heavy ice. As Adrian said, the ice that used to be 3 meters or more thick now has disappeared from the Arctic, and nearly all the ice now is first-year ice, which is only about 1.5 meters thick. So a farewell to ice, the ice that you know from the past, from your early days working up there, is gone. It means that you can't work on the ice safely anymore on using ice camps. This was an ice camp in 2007 in the Beaufort Sea. You establish that camp, you build huts, you maintain it by air, but if the ice is breaking up all the time because it's so thin, you can't maintain that camp anymore. So these days, if we want to do ice experiments in the Arctic on physics of what's happening to Arctic ice, we now have to freeze a ship into the ice, an ice-strengthened ship, and build a few huts around the ship so that if the ice breaks up, you can retreat to your ship and survive that way instead of not having anywhere to go when the ice is breaking up into fragments, as it now has a tendency to do in the winter. So this is the thinning and retreat that's going on, but this has a lot of feedbacks which I'll go through quickly and then talk about one particular thing, which is a feedback that we're experiencing this week. That as the ice retreats, people sort of think, well, this is interesting, this is very sad, and so on, but it's something in isolation. You don't have to think about it in relation to other things. But you do, because everything is connected on the planet, and retreat of sea ice doesn't have zero consequences elsewhere. In fact, the impacts it has are much more important than the retreat itself. One of the impacts is that it reduces albedo, global albedo. That is, the amount of radiation reflected back into space is reduced because there's less ice. The ice reflects 90% of radiation back into space, but open water only reflects 10%. So we have much more radiation absorbed. That accelerates global warming. And this analysis done at Scripps suggested that it's equivalent to adding a quarter to the greenhouse gases that we're adding to the atmosphere. So just the retreat, the warming causes sea ice retreat, the retreat of the sea ice causes more radiation absorption, and that's equivalent to adding a quarter to the amount of greenhouse gas you release. So it's a positive feedback that's very worrying. And in fact, they underestimated, because on top of the fact that the sea ice was retreating, the snow line on land is retreating as well. And that's retreating really precipitously it's now got a 6 million square kilometre deficit. And this means that all of this brown area in early summer is now free of snow, and it used to be snow covered. That doubles the amount of feedback, so that we're now adding about a half to the amount of warming that we're getting from greenhouse gases, due to the fact that the greenhouse gases are causing ice to retreat and snow line to retreat. So that's a severe, the albedo feedback is a severe effect. Also, the fact that we now have open water in summer means that you have warm air wafting over the Greenland ice cap. And we saw from Adrian's work that you've now got melt all over the surface of the ice cap. And in earlier years, you didn't get any melt over Greenland in summer. Then you started to get melt around the edges. That's the blue areas here, the low altitudes. But now you're getting melt over the entire surface in summer. That's the blue, the right-hand one. And that means that increase of meltwater that flows down through holes in the ice cap, called moulins, lubricates the bottom of the ice cap, causes glaciers to accelerate, increases the rate of loss of water from Greenland, increases the rate of global sea level rise. And we suspect that's going to cause at least 1 metre of sea level rise this century, and possibly a lot more. A second effect is that the ice has already retreated from all the shallow water areas around the edge of the Arctic. That's these light blue areas, less than 100 metres deep. And what we're finding is that permafrost on the seabed there is melting because of the open water, and that's stopped. That means that the permafrost used to hold back a huge mass of methane that was held in the sediments. That methane's now being released, and when you go up to the Arctic now in summer, you see what you see here on the right, huge plumes of methane gas coming out of the seabed, and that's one of the things we're studying at the moment up there. So these are some of the nasty feedbacks which occur as a consequence associated with sea level, with sea ice retreat. But the one I want to focus on, because it's relevant to this meeting, is the extreme weather events that are caused. And of course we've been going through an extreme weather event this week. And the way it happens is that the way it happens is that because the Arctic's warming up faster than the rest of the world, the temperature difference between the Arctic and lower latitudes is getting less. That means that the strength of the circulation, the strength of the winds between lower latitudes and higher latitudes is being weakened. And so the polar jet stream, which is the very strong wind system that separates the Arctic air mass from the subtropical air mass, has slowed down. And when something slows down, when a current or a wind slows down, it goes into big loops, like a slowly flowing river has bigger loops in it than a fast flowing river. So what you get for the jet stream, instead of a more or less straight stream of rapidly flowing air blowing eastwards, is it slows down and it develops these loops, and the loops seem to stay more or less in the same position and drift very slowly. And the result is that for the last 8 years, since 2005, there's been extreme weather occurring, especially in North America, but also in Europe in the winter, where you get alternation of extreme cold going down to low latitudes and extreme warmth going up to high latitudes. You can see how this happens. The polar jet stream separates polar air from warmer air. Here, for instance, we find that in winter you've got the Midwest now is experiencing warmth because you've now got warm air coming up south of the jet stream. Northeastern United States is extremely cold because you've got cold air coming down from the Arctic, and so on around the world. You're getting alternating anomalies of hot and cold, and that's something that didn't used to happen because the jet stream was relatively straight. And of course what's happening this week has been a loop in the jet stream has sat itself over Europe, and we're getting the cold coming and hitting us. Meanwhile, there's the air from lower latitudes is going right up to the Arctic, and you're getting heat in the Arctic. So this is the average, the way the temperature goes on average through the year at 80 degrees north, and this is what it's done this year. So we're 20 degrees warmer. The Arctic is 20 degrees warmer than it ought to be because of that loop in the jet stream, and the compensating loop that makes us cold is what we're experiencing at the moment. But these consequences are that of these extreme events is that you get disruption of food production in the mid-northern latitudes. That's the latitudes where these events occur. And mid-northern latitudes is where most of the world's food is grown. The world's croplands are these brown areas here, and those are severely affected. We found that if in the year 2000, the FAO produced a global food price index, and the average price of food throughout the world. It's a very difficult statistic to come up with, but they did it. And it started at 100 in the year 2000, and we can see in the year 2008 it rose to 220, then in 2012 it rose to 240. Note the years that this happened, those correspond to the big step downwards in sea ice extent, 2007 event, 2012 event. And so what seems to have happened, according to the scientists who looked at it, is that the warming of the Arctic has led to this effect on the jet stream. The jet stream modification has led to disruption of food production, led to increase in the price of food, and that, according to this analysis, has been one of the origins, associated with a lot of the civic unrest that occurs in cities in the third world, because food is so expensive. Because, for instance, the Arab Spring started with Tunis, and high-priced food in the cities. So young people living in huge numbers in third world cities, unable to grow food, having to buy food, not having any work, therefore finding it very difficult to buy food. When food prices go up, they starve. And so there's enormous unrest. They don't just starve, they'll start revolting. So whenever there's a food price index peak, you have a huge mass of unrest in third world cities, Middle East and Africa. So the last one was in 2011, but food price index slowly slid away since then, so we haven't had another crisis, but we will. And so here's a case where we can see food, that the Arctic change is producing disruption of food production, and that's producing severe effects. And the disruption of food production comes from these extreme weather events. But then if we think about warming in general, the story is very bad. I'll just show a couple of statistics. One is this is the UN 2015 World Population Prospects. This is an extraordinary prediction, and I don't understand it, but it shows this is the population of different zones of the world from 2015 to 2100, and we see, this is displaced a bit, we see modest increases, not modest actually, serious increases everywhere, except Europe, which shows a decrease. But Africa, there's a quadrupling, and this is a continent that can't feed itself now. And how are you going to cope with a quadrupling of the population of Africa by the end of this century? Nobody has said, but that number is being presented by the UN, and somehow you have to digest that number. And it is pretty frightening. And then the warming that's already occurring is already not only affecting food production by these disruptive weather events, but also by the simple act of warming. The reason the UN tried to hold global warming to less than 2 degrees, or is trying to, is simply this set of curves that you see of crop yields. This is all the standard basic crops, and this is temperature. Oh, right, I'll stop there. This is temperature rise since the beginning of the industrial era, and so we're up here at the moment, and many crops slightly improve right at the beginning. But from the point where we're at now, the only crop that actually improves its yield over the next degree or so of warming is Asian rice, or wheat, temperate wheat. But nearly everything else is suffering losses of 20%, 40%. If we go up 2 degrees, we're going to have huge losses of yield from basic crops. And we're going to go to more than 2 degrees, and this is, the fear is we'll have about 4 degrees warming by the end of the century. So the yields of crops are going to be going down. Something massive will have to be done for in changing the type of crops that we grow, because we'll be losing the yields. So that's really, I'll stop here, and in my book I say, well, what can we do? And of course, from this meeting, one thing that we can do is do our very best to restrict population growth. But if you're going to just go for physics, what I say in my book is we can't reduce our carbon emissions fast enough. So we've got to develop some technology, saved by techno-fix, I'm afraid it sounds like, but the techno-fix would have to be some way of taking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere directly by chemical means. And that would be the only way I can see to restrain global warming enough.
Thank you very much indeed, Peter. That was brilliant, and I do recommend the book if you want to know more, because it's really a very powerful book.